The first time I saw my father's farm listed as sold for $1, I thought it had to be a clerical mistake. $1. Not 100,000. Not a family transfer amount written for tax reasons. Not a partial sale with a private note attached somewhere in the county system. Just $1. The farm my father had worked for 43 years. The farm where my mother planted pear trees along the east fence. The farm where my sister and I learned to ride bicycles on a dirt lane that turned gold every October. My sister, Claire, had signed the deed. And the buyer was not the person she told me it was. I was sitting in the county records office in Cedar Falls, Iowa, with a paper copy of the deed trembling slightly between my fingers. Across the top, stamped in blue ink, were the words, "Warranty Deed." Near the bottom was Claire's neat signature, the one she had practiced as a teenager until it looked like it belonged on legal stationery. But beneath the buyer's name was a company I had never heard of. Redgate Holdings, LLC. That was strange enough. Then I opened my father's red diary, the one I had almost thrown into a donation box after his funeral, and found a note in his handwriting. If anything happens to me, do not trust the sale. The real buyer is closer than you think. I sat there for a long time. Because by then my father had been dead for 9 months, my sister had stopped returning my calls, and a polite man in a grey suit had already warned me that asking questions could damage my reputation, my job, and what little family I had left. Good day, dear listeners. It's Mia again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video, and also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Eleanor Whitaker. I was 46 years old when all of this began. I taught 11th grade history at a public high school in Des Moines, and until my father died, I believed I understood the difference between facts and stories. That was my job, after all. Every semester, I told my students that history was not just names and dates. It was evidence, it was context, it was learning to ask who benefited from a version of events. I taught them that paper trails matter, that signatures matter, that silence can be a kind of testimony. I never imagined I would have to use those same lessons to investigate my own family. My life was ordinary in the way I had always quietly appreciated. I lived in a 2-bedroom townhouse, with a small back patio, 6 overwatered basil plants, and a kitchen table permanently marked by coffee rings and stacks of student essays. I drove a 7-year-old Honda with a cracked cup holder. I bought groceries with coupons. I kept a drawer full of birthday cards I meant to mail on time and usually didn't. I was not poor, but I was careful. Teachers learn to be careful. We stretch salaries the way we stretch patience, one small decision at a time. My father, Harold Whitaker, still lived on the family farm outside Marshalltown. By the time he was 78, he no longer planted as much as he used to. He leased most of the acreage to a neighboring farmer named Amos Bell, who had known him since childhood. Dad kept the old white farmhouse, the equipment shed, the orchard, and 10 acres around the house for himself. He said it was enough land to keep a man humble. My mother had died 7 years earlier, and after that, my father became quieter. Not sad exactly, more like a house after the furniture has been moved out. Still standing, still familiar, but echoing in places that used to feel full. Claire visited him more than I did. That fact became important later, though at the time it only made me feel guilty. Claire lived 30 minutes away from the farm and worked as an office manager for a regional real estate development firm. She was efficient, polished, always early, always composed. She wore cream blouses and low heels, and had the kind of calm voice that made people believe she was being reasonable, even when she was taking something from them. I lived farther away, and spent my weekdays grading essays, attending staff meetings, and trying to convince teenagers that the Reconstruction amendments still mattered. I called Dad every Sunday evening. I drove up every other weekend, when school wasn't swallowing me whole. I brought him soup, library books, batteries for the smoke detectors, and once, after he mentioned the porch light flickering, a handyman from Des Moines who charged too much and fixed too little. My father never complained. "I'm doing fine, Ellie," he would say. "Don't fuss." Claire fussed differently. She handled things. Insurance forms, doctor appointments, property tax notices, bank paperwork. She would call me afterward, not before. Dad needed his medication organized, so I got him a pill dispenser. Dad misplaced a utility bill, so I set up autopay. Dad was confused about his land lease, so I took a look at it. Each sentence sounded helpful. Each sentence placed her closer to him and me, farther away. That is how betrayal often begins, I think. Not with a dramatic act, with convenience. With one person becoming the gatekeeper of small details until the door itself belongs to them. The first warning sign came in November, 3 months before Dad died. He called me on a Tuesday night. I remember because I was grading essays on the causes of the Great Depression, and one student had written that the stock market crashed because everybody got too excited about numbers. I had underlined it and laughed softly, because in a way, she wasn't wrong. When my phone rang, Dad's name appeared on the screen. "Ellie," he said when I answered. His voice was low. "Dad, are you okay?" There was a pause. I heard the television in the background, some old western playing too loudly. "Do you remember the red diary your mother gave me?" I leaned back in my chair. "The little leather one?" "Yes. Of course. You used to write weather notes in it. I need you to know where it is." Something in his tone made me put down my pen. "Why? If you ever need it, it's in the second drawer of the roll-top desk, behind the seed catalogues." I sat up slowly. "Dad, what's going on?" He exhaled through his nose, the way he did when deciding whether a thing was worth saying. "Maybe nothing." "That doesn't sound like nothing." Another pause. "Claire thinks I should simplify things." "What things?" "The farm, accounts, papers." I looked at the stack of essays in front of me, but the words blurred. "Simplify how?" "She says it would be easier if I put certain things in her name." My first instinct was not suspicion, it was annoyance. Claire had always liked control. When we were children, she organized our board games by color and accused me of ruining them if I put a card back in the wrong box. As adults, that habit had turned into something socially acceptable: competence. "Dad," I said carefully, "don't sign anything you don't understand. I understand more than she thinks." That sentence stayed with me. I asked him if he wanted me to come that night. He said no. I asked if he wanted me to call an attorney. He said no again, but softer. Then he said, "Just remember the diary." 2 weeks later, Claire called and told me Dad was becoming paranoid. "He's forgetting things, Ellie," she said. "He accused me of moving papers I never touched." "What papers?" She sighed, a patient little sound. "Old farm records, nothing important." "If it's nothing important, why was he upset?" "Because he's aging, that's what I'm trying to tell you." Her voice had that polished surface again, smooth as a school hallway after the janitor has waxed it. I had heard students use that same tone when they wanted to guide me away from the real answer. I drove to the farm the following Saturday. Dad was in the kitchen when I arrived, sitting at the table with a mug of coffee gone cold. The farmhouse smelled like dust, wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of apples stored too long in the pantry. His hands rested on either side of the mug. They looked larger than I remembered, swollen at the knuckles, mapped with veins. "You look tired," I said. "So do you." "I'm a teacher, that's permanent." He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. I asked him gently about the papers. He looked toward the living room, though we were alone. "Claire brought a man here." "What man?" "Said he was helping evaluate options." "What options?" "The farm." I felt a small, hard knot form in my stomach. "Dad, are you selling?" "No." He said it quickly. Then quieter. Not to him. "Who was he?" "Name was Victor Hale." I wrote it down later. At the time, I repeated it to remember. Victor Hale. My father looked at the window over the sink. Outside, the fields were brown and flat beneath a low sky. "He had soft hands," Dad said. "Men who want land but never touch dirt always have soft hands." That was my father. He noticed what people tried to hide in plain sight. Did Claire know him? She said he worked with her company. And why was he here? Dad took a long breath. He said the farm was becoming a burden. Said land can be protected through development partnerships. Said I could preserve the family legacy. That sounds like a sales pitch. It was. Did you sign anything? His eyes shifted toward the hallway. Not what they wanted. I should have pushed harder. I should have opened every drawer in that house and taken pictures of every document. I should have called an attorney the next morning, but life does not announce the last ordinary day. Instead, I made soup. I changed his furnace filter. I sat with him on the porch until sunset and listened to him talk about my mother's pear trees. Before I left, he held my hand longer than usual. Ellie, he said, truth is like a fence post. You can paint it, hide it with weeds, hang a sign on it, but if it's set deep enough, it stays. I kissed his cheek and told him to call me if Claire brought anyone else around. He promised. 3 months later, he was gone. The official cause was a stroke. Quick, the doctor said. Merciful, people said. I have learned that people call things merciful when they are relieved they do not have to describe the pain. The funeral was small. Neighbours, a few cousins, Dad's old church friends, some men from the co-op, and Claire's colleagues who stood near the back in dark coats and whispered into their phones. Victor Hale attended too. I recognized him before Claire introduced us. He was tall, silver-haired, maybe 55, with a narrow face and a charcoal overcoat that looked expensive without trying. He held my hand in both of his. Eleanor, he said, your father spoke highly of you. That was the first lie I heard from him. Not because my father wouldn't have spoken well of me, but because he never would have spoken about me to Victor Hale. I don't believe we've met, I said. No, unfortunately, I only had the privilege of speaking with Harold a few times. His smile was measured, sympathetic, professional. Claire appeared beside him. Victor has been very helpful with some of Dad's affairs. What affairs? Her eyes flicked toward me. Not now, Ellie. There are moments in classrooms when a student changes the subject too quickly, and every teacher feels the air shift. That was how it felt standing beside my father's casket. A tiny movement, a half-second of panic hidden under manners. After the burial, Claire told me the estate would be simple. Dad didn't have much liquid money, she said as we stood in the church basement beside a tray of untouched sandwiches. The house has maintenance issues. The land lease barely covers taxes. Honestly, it's more complicated than valuable. I stared at her. The farm is over 100 acres. Farmland isn't cash, Ellie. I know what farmland is. She touched my arm gently, as if I were a difficult parent at a school conference. I'm just saying we need to be realistic. Realistic about what? She lowered her voice. Dad signed some papers before he died. There was a transfer arrangement. I'll send you copies once I have everything organized. Transfer to whom? Her face softened in a way that felt rehearsed. To me, mostly. He wanted one person to manage it. The basement noise seemed to fade. Dad would have told me. Maybe he didn't want to upset you. I looked at her hand on my arm until she removed it. When did he sign? December. That was 1 month after he told me not to trust anyone with the farm. I asked for copies of the documents 5 times over the next 6 weeks. Claire always had a reason for delay. The attorney was reviewing them. The county had not processed something. The bank required additional forms. She was overwhelmed. I understood grief. I also understood avoidance. They are not the same, though they often wear the same coat. Then one afternoon in April, an envelope arrived at my townhouse. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of a deed transfer and a sticky note with 6 words written in block letters. Ask why she sold, for $1. There was no signature. The copy was poor quality, the edges dark from the machine, but I could read enough to see my father's name, Claire's name, and the phrase, consideration of $1. I called Claire immediately. She did not answer. I called again that evening. Nothing. The next morning, she texted, "Please stop panicking. It's a standard legal mechanism. Victor said it looks strange but is normal." Victor said, that was when I understood something I had taught for years but never truly felt in my bones. When a person does not have their own explanation, they borrow someone else's authority. I drove to Marshall County on a personal day. I told my principal I had a family legal matter. In the records office, under fluorescent lights that hummed like tired bees, A clerk named Donna helped me search the property database. She was a woman in her 60s with red glasses and a cardigan covered in tiny embroidered birds. She moved slowly, but not carelessly. "There is a difference." "Family farm?" she asked. "Yes. Those are the ones that hurt." She printed the deed, then a second document, then a third. I watched the pages slide from the printer. The farm had been transferred from my father to Claire through a power of attorney document dated December 14. Then, 3 weeks after his death, Claire had sold it to Redgate Holdings LLC for $1. But the mailing address for Redgate Holdings was not a corporate office. It was a suite number in the same building as Victor Hale's development firm. I felt cold from my wrists to my elbows. Donna looked at me over her glasses. "Honey," she said quietly, "you may want a lawyer." Before I left, I asked her if there were any older records connected to the property. She clicked through several screens. "There's a conservation easement from 1998, some mineral rights reservation from way back, and something else." She frowned. "What?" "A memorandum of option, filed 2 years ago, then released. Related party name, Hale Land Strategies. Victor again." I folded the papers into my bag as carefully as if they were evidence in a museum. On the drive to the farm, I kept both hands tight on the wheel. The fields on either side of the road were just beginning to green. It was the kind of spring day my father loved, damp and stubborn, with clouds dragging their shadows across the land. Claire's car was not there when I arrived. The house felt different without Dad, not empty exactly, watched. I went straight to the roll-top desk in the small room off the kitchen. For one terrifying minute, I thought the diary was gone. The second drawer held seed catalogues, old pencils, rubber bands, a pair of reading glasses, and an envelope full of tractor receipts. Then I slid my hand behind the drawer and felt leather. The diary was dark red, worn soft at the edges. My mother had given it to him the Christmas after I left for college. On the first page, she had written, "For all the things you notice and never say." Most pages contained weather notes, rainfall amounts, planting dates, repairs, names of neighbors who stopped by. My father wrote like he lived, plainly. Then, in the last quarter of the diary, the entries changed. "Claire brought VH again. Wants option signed, says taxes will bury girls if I refuse. Lie." 2 pages later. "Bank called about new authorization. I did not approve online access. Need ask Ellie." My throat tightened. Another entry. "C. Angry when I asked about Redgate. Said I was confused. I am not confused." And then the final note, written shakier than the others. "If anything happens to me, do not trust the sale. Real buyer is closer than you think. Look at Mother's pantry wall." I read that sentence 3 times. Mother's pantry wall. The pantry was narrow and cold, with shelves my father had built in the 1970s. My mother had painted the back wall pale yellow, though most of it was hidden behind jars, flour tins, and old canning equipment. I began removing things from the shelves. Pickle jars, dusty tins, a blue bowl with a crack down the side, a box of recipe cards. My hands moved faster as I reached the back wall. Near the bottom shelf, behind a stack of rusted pie pans, I saw a small rectangular patch where the paint did not match. I pressed it. Nothing. Then I slid my fingernail along the edge and found a tiny brass latch. A panel opened inward. Behind it was a space between studs, no wider than a shoebox. Inside sat a manila envelope wrapped in plastic. My father had written my name on it. Not Claire's. Mine. I carried it to the kitchen table and sat in his chair. The vinyl cushions sighed beneath me. For a moment I could not open the envelope. I just sat there, listening to the refrigerator hum and the wind move along the porch boards. Inside were photocopies of bank statements, letters, a handwritten timeline, and a flash drive taped to a note. The note said, "Do homework before emotion." I almost laughed then, not because anything was funny, but because that was exactly what he would say to a daughter who spent her life assigning homework. Do homework before emotion. The first bank statement showed an account at Prairie State Bank with a balance of $412,870. I had never heard of the account. The second statement showed transfers out, $10,000, $25,000, $50,000. Each one labeled as consulting, property assessment, estate preparation. The recipient was Hale Land Strategies. My hands went numb. My father had not been poor. He had been drained. That night, I did not call Claire. I did not call Victor. I did not even call the police. I drove back to Des Moines with the envelope on the passenger seat, strapped under the seatbelt like a child. Halfway home, I pulled into a gas station parking lot because I realized I had been holding my breath. Fear is strange. It does not always make you small. Sometimes it makes the world painfully clear. I bought a coffee I did not want and sat in my car under the buzzing canopy lights. Teenagers laughed near the soda machine inside. A truck idled beside the pumps. Somewhere beyond the interstate, my father's farm sat in the dark under a deed that said it no longer belonged to us. I opened my school bag and took out a yellow legal pad. At the top, I wrote 3 questions. Who controlled Dad's bank account? Who owned Redgate Holdings? What did Claire sign, and when? Then I wrote a 4th question beneath those. Was Dad afraid before he died? I stared at that one until my eyes burned. I was not brave. I was careful. There is a difference, and that difference saved me. The next morning, I called a probate attorney named Margaret Sloane. She had represented one of my colleagues during a guardianship dispute, and my colleague once said, "Margaret doesn't raise her voice because she doesn't need to." Her office was in an old brick building near the courthouse. Bookshelves lined the walls, not decorative books, used books, marked books, books that had been opened by people looking for ways out of trouble. Margaret was in her early 60s, with silver hair cut to her chin and eyes that made lying seem inconvenient. She listened for 40 minutes without interrupting as I laid out the deed, the diary, the envelope, the bank statements, and Claire's messages. When I finished, she tapped one finger on the diary. Your father anticipated a dispute. Yes. Did he have a will? Claire says he did. Have you seen it? No. Has an estate been opened in probate court? I don't know. She leaned back. Then we begin there. I expected outrage. I wanted someone to say this was terrible, criminal, unforgivable. Margaret gave me something better. A list. She wrote it on her own legal pad in clean block letters. Certified copies of all deeds. Power of attorney document. Will and trust instruments. Bank records. Medical records from the last 6 months. Corporate records for Redgate Holdings. Communications from Claire and Victor. Do not accuse anyone yet, she said. That's hard. I know. She sold his farm for $1. She may say it was part of a larger agreement. There wasn't one. Then we prove that. I sat there, trying to steady myself. Margaret's voice softened. Eleanor, people who manipulate legal documents count on 2 reactions: panic and shame. Panic makes you sloppy. Shame makes you quiet. You can't afford either. I thought of my students before a major exam, rushing through the questions they actually knew because fear had taken over their hands. So what do? You document, you preserve, you communicate in writing, you stop giving your sister advance notice of what you know. And Victor? Especially Victor. 2 days later, Margaret confirmed that no probate estate had been properly opened. Claire had filed a small estate affidavit, claiming Dad had minimal assets outside transferred property. She had also submitted a copy of a will dated January 3rd, leaving all real and personal property to Claire, with a handwritten note saying I had been provided for separately. I had not. The signature looked like my father's at first glance, but not at second. Teachers spend years reading handwriting. We know when a student's parent suddenly develops the same spelling errors as the student. We know when a signature is traced slowly, rather than written naturally. My father's real signature had pressure at the beginning and a slight upward hook on the final R. The will signature was careful all the way through, like someone copying a drawing. Margaret did not call it forged. Not yet. She said, questioned. That became the word we used. The questioned will. The questioned power of attorney. The questioned sale. The investigation unfolded the way a good history lesson does, one source at a time. At Prairie State Bank, Margaret sent a preservation letter. At the county recorder's office, she obtained certified copies of every property document filed in the previous 5 years. Through the Secretary of State website, we found Redgate Holdings LLC. The registered agent was a corporate services company, but the organizer was not hidden well enough. Claire Whitaker. My sister had formed Redgate Holdings 11 days after Dad's funeral. I remember the moment Margaret told me. I was standing in the hallway outside my classroom during lunch, holding my phone to my ear, while students moved past me carrying trays and backpacks. Claire created it? I whispered. Yes. Then sold the farm to her own company? That appears to be the structure. For $1. Yes. Across the hall, 2 students were arguing over a vending machine that had eaten $1. One of them slapped the glass and said, "That's theft." I almost sat down on the floor. Margaret continued, "There's more. Redgate assigned development rights to Hale Land Strategies 2 weeks later. So Victor was the real buyer. That is our working theory." I closed my eyes. The truth has a weight of its own. At first you think discovering it will make you lighter. Sometimes it does the opposite. That evening, Claire called. I let it go to voicemail. Then she texted, "Victor says your attorney contacted the county. I wish you had spoken to me first." I did not respond. A minute later, another message. "This is becoming embarrassing. Dad trusted me to handle things. Please don't turn grief into suspicion." That was the sentence that almost broke my calm. Please don't turn grief into suspicion. As if suspicion was something I had invented because sadness needed a hobby. I forwarded the messages to Margaret. She replied, "Good, preserve all." The next week, I received a letter from Victor Hale's attorney. It was written in the language polite people use when they are sharpening knives. It said my inquiries were interfering with valid business interests. It said defamatory allegations could result in claims against me. It said Redgate Holdings and Hale Land Strategies had acted in good faith reliance on signed documents. Near the end, it offered me $25,000 in exchange for a release of all claims and a confidentiality agreement. $25,000 for my father's farm, his missing account, his diary, my silence, and my self-respect. I took the letter to Margaret. She read it once, then smiled without warmth. "He's nervous. This is nervous. This is very nervous." She drafted our response. It was short. It requested full documentation of the transaction, including all communications, payment records, appraisals, authority documents, and disclosures. It also notified them that litigation was being prepared. 3 days later, Victor called me directly. I was at my kitchen table grading quizzes, my phone lit up with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Eleanor Whitaker?" "Yes." "This is Victor Hale. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." His voice was warm, almost gentle. "You should speak with my attorney." "I respect that. I only wanted to express my concern. This situation is painful for everyone." I clicked my pen twice, a habit from faculty meetings. "What situation?" "The misunderstanding around your father's estate. I don't discuss legal matters without counsel." Of course. Still, I knew Harold. He was proud of both his daughters. I'd hate to see his memory damaged by accusations that won't hold up. There it was, not a threat, a shadow of one. "My father's memory is not what concerns me," I said. "The documents do." A pause. "You're a teacher, correct?" "Yes." "Then you understand how reputations work in communities. Once stories begin circulating, they're difficult to correct." My kitchen seemed suddenly very quiet. "Mr. Hale, are you warning me?" "No. I'm encouraging you to be thoughtful." "I am being thoughtful." Another pause. Then his voice cooled by 1 degree. "Your sister is prepared to resolve this generously, but if you continue, you may find the process more expensive than the outcome." I looked at my father's red diary on the table beside me. "I'll let my attorney know you called." "Eleanor." I hung up. My hand shook afterward, but only afterward. Fear delayed is still fear. But delay gives you time to act. The first major proof came from the bank. Margaret had filed a petition challenging the estate documents and seeking an injunction to prevent any sale, development, or encumbrance of the farm. Once the court accepted the petition, subpoenas followed. Prairie State Bank produced signature cards, online access logs, transfer requests, and surveillance stills. The account with over $400,000 had belonged to my father and my mother. It was money from an old crop insurance settlement, mineral rights payments, and years of careful saving. My mother had insisted they keep it separate from the farm operating account. After my mother died, Dad never touched most of it. Then, beginning in October, someone accessed it online from an IP address connected to Claire's home. 2 transfers went to Hale Land Strategies. One went to a company called Northbridge Consulting. Northbridge Consulting, we later learned, was owned by Victor's brother-in-law. Then there was the power of attorney. The bank had accepted it on December 18th. It gave Claire authority over Dad's accounts, real estate, and business matters. The notary stamp belonged to a woman named Denise Morrow, who worked in Claire's office. But Dad had been in the hospital on December 14th, the date he supposedly signed it. Not for a stroke. For dehydration and a fall. Medical records showed he was admitted at 7:42 a.m. and discharged the next afternoon. Nurses' notes described him as alert but medicated for pain at the time the power of attorney was allegedly executed at the farmhouse. That was impossible. Margaret read the timeline aloud in her office, then looked at me. This is the point of no return. I nodded. I thought I would feel satisfaction. Instead, I felt grief opening another room inside me. Because the documents did not just show fraud. They showed planning. They showed that while I was calling Dad on Sundays, Claire was positioning herself around him like a fence being moved in the night, inch by inch, until the land inside no longer looked stolen. The confrontation came on a rainy Thursday. I had stayed home from school because Margaret and I had a scheduled video call with a forensic document examiner. Around 4 in the afternoon, my doorbell rang. Claire stood on my porch under a black umbrella. She looked thinner than at the funeral. Her hair was pulled into a smooth knot, and her beige coat was belted tightly at the waist. For a second, I saw her at 16, standing outside my bedroom after borrowing my sweater without asking, already preparing the explanation that would make me seem unreasonable. "Can we talk?" she asked. "You should talk to Margaret. I'm your sister." That sentence landed softly, which made it worse. I let her in but kept my phone in my cardigan pocket with the recorder running. Margaret had told me Iowa law allowed one-party consent recordings, but to use discretion. I never thought I would need that advice in my own living room. Claire sat on the edge of my sofa. She glanced around, as if evaluating the room. "You've made this bigger than it needed to be," she said. I remained standing. "Dad's farm was sold for $1 to a company you created." Her face tightened. "It was a legal transfer. Then why hide it?" "I wasn't hiding it. I was managing it." "Managing it for whom?" "For the family." I let the silence sit between us. In teaching, silence is useful. People often rush to fill it with the truth. Claire looked away first. Victor had investors. There was going to be a senior living development. Tasteful, low density. Dad liked the idea. "No, he didn't. You weren't there. I have his diary." Her eyes snapped back to mine. That was the first time I saw fear on her face. "What diary?" "The red one." She stood. Dad was confused. He wrote dates, names, transfers, conversations. "You don't understand what it was like," she said, her voice still controlled but thinner now. "You came in on weekends with soup and opinions. I handled the doctors, the bills, the calls in the middle of the day. I was the one there. I know you did more. No, you don't. You got to be the good daughter, because you weren't tired enough to resent him." That hurt, because part of it was true. Not the crime, not the betrayal, but the exhaustion beneath it. I would have helped more if you had asked. Claire laughed once, without humor. "You always say that. Teachers love hypothetical virtue." I felt heat rise in my chest, but I kept my voice even. "Did you forge Dad's signature?" Her face went still. "No." "Did Victor?" "No." "Did Denise notarize a document he never signed?" "I'm leaving." She moved toward the door, then turned back. "You need to take the settlement." No. You think this ends with justice? It ends with lawyers taking everything and people at church whispering that Dad lost his mind. Dad did not lose his mind. You can't prove that. I looked at her then, really looked. Yes, I said, I can. The deposition was held in a conference room, with grey walls, bad coffee, and a long table polished so brightly it reflected everyone's hands. By then, our civil case had expanded. Margaret had filed claims for undue influence, fraud, conversion of funds, breach of fiduciary duty, and quiet title. The probate court had frozen further transfer of the farm. A county prosecutor had begun reviewing the notarization issue, and a state banking investigator had requested records. I had learned a new language that year. Interrogatories. Subpoena juicis tecum. Constructive trust. Fiduciary duty. Lis pendens. Words that sounded cold, until I understood they could protect warm things. A home, a field, a dead man's intention, a daughter's right to ask what happened. Claire's deposition came first. She wore navy and pearls. She answered calmly at the beginning. Yes, she helped Dad with bills. Yes, he trusted her. Yes, he wanted to simplify the estate. Yes, Victor had offered professional guidance. Margaret asked, when did Harold Whittaker sign the power of attorney? December 14th. Where? At the farmhouse. What time? I don't remember exactly. Margaret placed a medical record in front of her. Would it surprise you to learn your father was admitted to Mercy Hospital at 7:42 that morning? Claire stared at the page. I may have the date wrong. Margaret slid the power of attorney beside it. The date is printed here. The notary attested that Harold signed in her presence at the farmhouse on December 14. Claire's attorney shifted in his chair. Margaret continued, were you at the hospital that day? I visited him, so you knew he was not at the farmhouse. I was under stress. Did he sign the document at the hospital? I don't recall. Did he sign it at all? Claire looked down. Her attorney said, objection, asked and answered. Margaret's voice stayed calm. You may answer. I believed he wanted me to have authority. That was not my question. The room went quiet. The court reporter's fingers hovered over the keys. Claire whispered, I don't remember. Victor's deposition was different. He arrived with 2 attorneys, and the confidence of a man used to rooms rearranging themselves around him. He greeted Margaret by her first name, though she did not do the same. He called me Eleanor, with a softness that made my skin tighten. He testified that he had only advised Claire informally, that Red Gate was her entity, that Hale Land Strategies merely held a development option, that all payments from my father's account were consulting fees approved by Harold. Margaret opened a folder. Mr. Hale, did you email Claire Whittaker on November 22, with the subject line, Urgent, POA required? I'd have to see the document. She handed it to him. He read without expression. Is this your email? It appears so. Please read the highlighted sentence. His attorney objected, but Victor read it. Without durable authority, we cannot move funds or secure title before Harold changes his mind again. The words sat in the room like smoke. Margaret asked, what did you mean by, before Harold changes his mind again? Harold was inconsistent. Because he refused to sell? Because he did not understand the opportunity? Did you consider his refusal an obstacle? I considered it a challenge to be resolved in the family's best interest. Margaret placed another document down. Is Northbridge Consulting owned by your brother-in-law? Victor's jaw moved slightly. I believe he has an interest. Did Northbridge perform services for Harold Whittaker? I don't know. Then why did $50,000 from Harold Whittaker's bank account go to Northbridge 6 days after Claire received online access? His attorney leaned forward. Objection. Margaret waited. Victor said, you'd have to ask Claire. We did. For the first time, he looked directly at me. Not kindly, not politely, coldly. That was when I understood how men like Victor operate. They do not need to shout. They build systems where shouting is unnecessary. They make pressure look like advice, theft look like planning, and surrender look like maturity. But systems leave records. The final collapse came from Denise Morrow, the notary. At first, she insisted everything was proper. Then Margaret subpoenaed office access logs from Claire's employer and hospital visitor records. Denise had been at work the entire day the power of attorney was supposedly signed. She had not gone to the farmhouse. She had not gone to the hospital. Faced with possible criminal charges, Denise amended her statement. Claire had brought the signed pages to the office. Victor was present. Denise was told Harold had signed earlier and that notarizing later was a harmless technicality. She admitted she never witnessed his signature. Then the forensic document examiner issued her report. The signatures on the will and power of attorney were not genuine. They were simulations, careful copies, slow lines, with tremor inconsistencies, lift marks where a natural signature would flow. When Margaret called to tell me, I was sitting in my empty classroom after school. The desks were arranged in rows for final exams. On the board I had written, "Use evidence, not guesses." I looked at that sentence for a long time. The case did not go to a dramatic jury trial the way people imagine. Real justice often happens in conference rooms, chambers, filings, negotiated orders, and signatures that finally tell the truth. The probate judge invalidated the questioned will and power of attorney. The deed transfer to Claire and the $1 sale to Redgate were set aside. The farm was placed back into my father's estate. A constructive trust was imposed over funds transferred through Redgate and Hale-related entities. Claire resigned from her job. Victor Hale's development firm was investigated for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, fraud, and conspiracy connected to multiple land acquisitions involving elderly owners. I later learned my father had not been the only one, just the first family member stubborn enough to leave a diary and the first daughter patient enough to read it properly. Claire accepted a civil settlement that required her to repay what could be recovered from her accounts and surrender any claim to the farm beyond a reduced statutory share. Criminally, she pled to lesser charges: no prison, probation, restitution, community service, and a permanent stain on the polished life she had built. Some people thought that was too little. Some thought it was too much. I stopped asking people what they thought justice should look like when they did not have to carry the facts to bed every night. Victor's outcome took longer. Men like him rarely fall all at once. They appeal, they delay, they produce new explanations. But eventually, the emails, bank records, false invoices, and testimony from Denise and others formed a wall high enough that he could not smile over it. He lost his license to broker development deals involving estate properties. His company dissolved under lawsuits. He entered a plea agreement on financial fraud charges connected not only to my father's case but to 2 others. The day Margaret called to tell me, I did not celebrate. I went outside and watered my basil. Then I sat on my patio until the sun went down. Because money had never been the real story. The farm was eventually divided through the estate process. I could not afford to maintain all of it alone, and I did not want to become trapped by the very land my father had tried to protect. With Margaret's guidance, I placed most of the acreage into a conservation lease with Amos Bell continuing to farm it. The farmhouse and 10 acres stayed with me. I did not move there right away. For almost a year, I visited on weekends. I cleaned slowly. I opened windows. I washed curtains that smelled like dust and wood smoke. I sorted my mother's recipe cards and my father's tools. I labeled boxes the way I taught students to label evidence, dates, contents, source. In the pantry, I kept the hidden panel. Not because I needed it anymore. Because some doors should remain as reminders. Claire wrote me one letter. It arrived 15 months after the settlement. No return address, though I recognized her handwriting. She did not ask forgiveness, not directly. She wrote that she had convinced herself she was owed something for being the daughter who stayed close. She wrote that Victor made every step feel normal, professional, temporary, fixable. She wrote that after the first lie, the second felt less like a choice and more like maintenance. I read the letter twice. Then I placed it in a folder, not the trash. Forgiveness is not a courtroom. There is no schedule for it, no filing deadline, no judge to compel your heart into order. I have not fully forgiven Claire, but I have stopped letting her actions live inside me as daily weather. That is enough for now. I still teach. In fact, I teach differently. When my students complain about primary sources, I tell them that documents are not dead paper. They are voices waiting for someone patient enough to listen. When they rush to conclusions, I remind them that the first version of a story is often the one told by the person with the most to lose. Sometimes, when we study land treaties or inheritance laws or court records, I look at their young faces and think about my father's diary. Do homework before emotion. It sounds simple. It is not. Emotion arrives first. It kicks the door open. It demands to drive. It tells you to call, accuse, cry, post, scream, collapse, or surrender. Homework comes quietly. Homework says, make a copy. Write down the date. Save the message. Ask who benefits. Find the original. Call someone who knows the law. Sleep before you sign. I sold my townhouse 2 years after everything ended and moved into the farmhouse. Not because it was grand. It wasn't. The roof still needed work. The porch leaned slightly to the left. The kitchen cabinets stuck in humid weather. But in spring, the pear trees bloomed. I planted lavender along the fence and tomatoes behind the shed. I turned my father's old workshop into a reading room with a second-hand sofa and shelves for my history books. On Saturday mornings, I drank coffee on the porch and watched the fields brighten. I was not rich in the way people imagine after inheritance stories. I was safe. There is a difference. I had enough money recovered to repair the house, pay my legal bills, support a small scholarship at my school for students planning to study agriculture, law, or history, and take one quiet trip to Maine because my mother had always wanted to see the rocky coast. I went alone. On the last morning there, I stood near the water with my coat pulled tight and thought about my father. I thought about how hard he had tried to leave a fence post deep enough that truth would remain standing after him. And I thought about myself. For months, I had believed I was fighting for land, money, documents, and a dead man's wishes. But I was also fighting for the part of me that had been trained to doubt my own suspicion when someone polite told me I was overreacting. That may have been the greatest inheritance my father left me. Not the farm, not the account, the permission to trust what I noticed. So if you ever find yourself holding a paper that does not make sense, listening to a smooth explanation that leaves you colder than before, or being told that asking questions makes you cruel, remember this. Calm is not weakness. Documentation is not obsession. Patience is not surrender. And truth, when it is set deep enough, can outlast every polished lie built on top of it. My sister sold Dad's farm for $1. But my father left me a red diary, a hidden envelope, and one final lesson written between the lines of his ordinary life. People may try to steal what you own. The more dangerous ones try to steal what you know. Do not give it to them. What would you have done if you found that diary and realized your own family had been hiding the truth? Tell me in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, please like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes one person's warning becomes another person's protection.